If I were to have a diagnosis of anxiety or depression, my employer does not have any legal right to find out or to be told or made known that I got that diagnosis and what sort of medications I'm on. And that's sometimes the misinformation that is put out there, is that a lot of high-income earners, physicians and lawyers are afraid to get these diagnoses assigned to them because then they have to tell their employers.
That's expected from the people that hire us, whether it's clients or patients or corporations and employers, the people that are receiving our services, they expect to just receive our services. They don't want to hear about what we're struggling with because they're paying us. And so the ability to work through and work with your mental health is very important. What options are available to you? What can and can you not do in the workplace if you need some time off or if you need some accommodations?
Medicine,
law, friendship. This is Dr. Long and Lawyer Nik. You're listening to the Medico-Legal Brief.
one doctor, one lawyer, and a whole lot of gray area.
Thank you, listeners and viewers, for returning to another episode of the Medico-Legal Brief, where medicine meets the law. I'm Lawyer Nik, and as always, I have my co-host, Dr. Long. Dr. Long, how's it going today, man?
Going great. Beautiful day. A day off for me, but I get to do some enjoyable things like podcasting with you.
Yeah. Now, I know that we're going to jump into our podcast topic here in a second, which is a pretty serious topic today. But I saw recently that you marked yourself safe from a tornado. Tell me about that.
Yes, we live in Wisconsin, and we were 3 to 4 miles away from where the tornado touched down and hit. My husband was at home at the time, so he felt the winds. I was actually working up north, so about 20 to 30 miles away from where the tornado hit. But you could see the storms coming in, and then just viewing the videos of the aftermath, we were very lucky to have avoided that area and lucky that our home is still standing.
Yeah, being in Texas, we have to worry about tornadoes all the time, pretty much all spring, summer, and into the fall. But with family in Chicago, I will always get weather alerts of what's going on in Chicago. I saw bad storms hitting the city and the northern part of Illinois, but I didn't realize they went up to where you were at. So when I saw you mark yourself safe, I thought, oh, wow, he must have been really close to a tornado if he's actually going out of his way to mark himself safe.
We had a lot of friends reach out instead of responding to every single person, especially people I haven't spoken to in a while. I wanted to just click it. That way people saw it right away and knew that everything was fine.
Yeah, it helps limit the stress and anxiety for your loved ones, for family and friends, and probably even yourself. Like you mentioned, you don't have to respond to every single text message. But today I want to talk about something that is a more serious topic. I kind of want to discuss how mental health impacts the workplace. And I know this is near and dear to your heart, so I want to open it up to you to give your 2 cents on it.
In general, a lot of us these days, we're constantly dealing with high stress situations, whether that's with your career, personal life, finances. If you don't have those building blocks or the skills or the tools to deal with those emotions, it comes out in ways that you and others around you don't expect. And it can present itself as anxiety, depression, bipolar. And in severe cases, it can go into hallucination, psychosis, and schizophrenia. But other ancillary diagnoses like ADHD, OCD can also be seen in a lot of people. Some people surrounding them may not realize that they have that diagnosis. And some people may not realize that their physicians and their lawyers actually have these diagnoses. I actually have the pleasure of being the doctor of several other physicians and other lawyers. And we talk about these things and how stressful it is to not only try to suppress or manage these inner turmoils, but also present a reasonable face, being able to talk to the public, to their clients and to their patients, and show them that they are capable of doing their job without any sort of bias or judging them just based on a diagnosis they have on paper.
Mental health awareness is extremely important. In the last decade, it's really come to the forefront at school and in the workplace. But I still think the workplace and your employer, it's a gray area because we want to keep our personal lives out of work. We want to show up and do our job. And to some extent, that's expected from the people that hire us, whether it's clients or patients or corporations and employers, the people that are receiving our services, they expect to just receive our services. They don't want to hear about the emotional weekend we had. They don't want to hear about what we're struggling with because they're paying us, in some instances, good money to just do what they need us to do. It gets overlooked, and the ability to work through and work with your mental health is very important. What options are available to you? What can and can you not do in the workplace if you need some time off or if you need some accommodations?
Unfortunately, a lot of this stems from the culture in the US, in our country, because it's almost a badge of honor to be able to say that you've worked this much for this many hours and make this much money. You rarely hear bragging about, oh, this is the amount of time I was able to have off, or this is the amount of time that I could take to do my own stuff. It's always, I was able to work a 40-hour work week and be able to do this other thing. The forefront of all of this is usually how much are you able to work? How much are you able to do efficiently, effectively, whether you are having any other issues from a mental health side or anything personal, it doesn't matter as long as you're able to get the job done.
Exactly. So let's start, as we usually do, with the medical aspect of mental health. You're a family medicine doctor, so you see a wide array of things, whether it's contusions, broken bones, all the way up to the people suffering from mental health issues. When you're looking at the spectrum of mental health, what things do you feel like you've seen that are manageable at a family doctor level or manageable from a personal perspective? And then how does that elevate into referring out to a specialist, whether that's a psychiatrist, a psychologist, a therapist, a counselor?
Well, things that are manageable from a family physician's clinic is really dependent on the family doctor and how much training they've got, but also their comfort level. Majority of mental health diagnoses, there is a wide range. Not every single diagnosis is automatically a moderate or severe case. There are mild cases, moderate cases, and severe. And then there are things that are controlled versus uncontrolled. And that runs the gamut between anxiety, that could be mild, simple as worrying about your kids and you're worrying about where they're at and how they're doing at daycare, to you're worrying about your livelihood every single day, no matter what. And so you're constantly on edge, worried you're going to be fired. Talking about depression, right? People walk around all the time with smiles on their faces. They're right on the edge of trying to manage their life and making sure everything is fine. And they're able to make it through their lives. And I would consider that pretty moderate depression, whereas those that are in severe depression usually don't leave their home. They've pushed all their family and friends away. So again, every single diagnosis out there that we manage and we see in the clinic, it ranges from mild to severe. And each doctor has to make the decision on what they feel comfortable doing and managing. I do a lot of prescription management, so a lot of medications that we utilize, but really the other half of the solution is getting patients in to see their therapists, their counselors, a psychiatrist sometimes. But unfortunately, because of how abundant these diagnoses are, and because as a country, we have not truly put in the resources to supply our children and our younger generations to deal with these emotions, we are struggling with the resources now once they're adults and how we help them get through their hardships. That's where it leads into professional careers like ours, physicians, lawyers, high income earners, people who are dealing with really high stress situations. They also have to deal with stress, anxiety, depression, sometimes bipolar, OCD, ADHD. And what sort of ramifications are they expected to deal with if it becomes uncontrolled?
Now, I have a Bachelor of Arts in psychology, not a Bachelor of Science. So my medical classes I had to take in college were pretty much non-existent, but we did have to refer to the DSM quite a bit. So the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. When you get somebody who comes in, do you ever refer to the DSM and try to figure out where they might fall in line of a mental health disorder?
Of course, that is our foundational outline that we use to help diagnose patients and help treat them. For you to treat someone appropriately, you have to first make the right diagnosis. And sometimes that can be hard because usually when someone has one mental illness, whether that's anxiety, whether that's depression, there's some other underlying issues that come with it. For example, if someone's coming in with PTSD, they tend to have some underlying anxiety or some underlying depression. Unfortunately, there's a lot to tweeze out when you're in an encounter with a patient talking about mental health and figuring out, is it truly what they think it is, which is anxiety, or is there something more that we should be focusing in on, which by treating that underlying issue may actually fix their anxiety or treat their anxiety as well.
That actually leads into a follow-up question. When you're dealing with individuals that have mental health issues, and this is going to flow into our conversation about mental health in the workplace, have you seen individuals that are naive to their mental health issues, where they believe that there isn't a mental health issue that exists? And then to the contrary, individuals that believe they have every mental health disorder under the sun when really nothing is actually wrong with them?
Yes, on both ends. Let's start with the extreme, almost a hypochondriac type patient. They're coming in, they might have, I wouldn't say it's psychosis, but delusions. We have a handful of patients that come in and they are so fixated on something about their health, their physical or medical health, that they have created almost these symptoms and this evidence that they feel is proving that they have this illness. I've had several patients come in with shaved off eyebrows and hair, just shaved everything off their body because they are so certain that they have mites living on them that are growing on them. And no matter what they do, no matter what sort of evidence they are looking for, they can't bring it to show the doctor, the physician, but they themselves see it. They say when they're in the shower and they wash themselves, they see the mites come out. But when they take a photo, the mites disappear or they go hiding. We see that a lot, and it's an extreme case because it is very difficult to manage because most of these people do not realize that they are in an alternate reality, really. And for us to bring them out of it, we have to convince them that they need to take their medications, which will calm down those delusions. But getting them to do that and be compliant is then another barrier and another struggle. So that's one extreme. The other extreme is actually more common than we realize, but men in general are very, very resistant to any sort of mental health diagnosis. They may be going out to drink every single night and not realize it's because they're depressed and they're using alcohol as a way to cure or fix their feelings, to hide from their emotions. We see that a lot. Patients coming in, they've gained 10, 15 pounds every single year for the last 3 years. They tell me that they've been drinking every night, and their excuse is, I just like to drink. It's something that the boys go out and do. But then as we dive deeper, I ask, are you happy with your work life? Are you stressed out with your home life? And they will say yes to everything. And then they will also tell me, yeah, I don't sleep that well. I have a lot of these other issues that I didn't think about. I'm no longer motivated to do my hobbies. All I want to do is just work, drink, and go to sleep. That is completely different from what they used to do as a teenager or as someone in their 20s. And so for me, it's fairly obvious that, hey, you're hitting all of these checkpoints off the list that says you are either anxious or you're depressed and that we should really be managing it. And yet a lot of men are very resistant to that because in our society, it's almost dinged as a weakness, right?
That's exactly right. With us both being men, we have friends. And obviously, I've seen lawyers, I've seen coworkers, you've seen patients, you've seen coworkers deal with their emotional issues different ways. And it's almost like each individual is looking for that kick of dopamine where they're either going to go party and drink and do drugs. They're going to go out and try to find a way to have sex, whether that's paying for it or whether that's just trying to hit on the women at the local bar. Then you have those others that dive maybe into gambling or risky behavior, just anything for a release. And I've seen those types. I have friends that have gone down that path. For myself, there are instances in which I'll be sad and I'll turn to something that I probably shouldn't be turning to try to find a way to be happy. You're exactly on point with this repetition amongst men to act like it doesn't exist and find the other outlets to try to find some sort of mental release from it. And it's just its own vicious circle.
And beyond just the gender differences, women are usually more likely to go seek out help when they feel like they need it. But when it comes to career choices, like high stress careers, physicians, lawyers, once you make it to graduate school, it's really hard to then seek out help when the entire public feels like you are so privileged for you to have made it into medical school, to make it into law school, to have not only the financial means to proceed, but the smarts to continue. If there's any sort of struggle during medical school and law school, it's very hard for those students to reach out for help because they feel like they are now failing and that they shouldn't be struggling, but that's not reality. Everyone struggles in their unique way, and sometimes people struggle early in life, some struggle later in life. Some people have higher thresholds before they actually break down and need help. That is something that I see constantly with medical students and residents. And I'm curious whether or not that's something that you see within your law colleagues and law students when you're going through law school, if that was also something where people were just afraid to seek out help, because not only is it a stigma for physicians and lawyers to get this diagnosis, but what will your colleagues and future employers think if you have this diagnosis with you along the way?
I think you're exactly right. The stigma does exist. You try to put yourself on a pedestal that you've done the work to get there, that you're educated enough or that you're knowledgeable enough or that you have enough social skill to get there. And trying to seek out help, even quietly, has a stigma that revolves around it in which you might be ashamed or you don't want other people to know because you don't want to be judged. There are some individuals that think if they pursue help and somebody finds out, it might negatively impact their job, where now somebody is going to question whether or not they can competently and confidently perform their work duties, which transitions into the crux of our conversation in the workplace. And we're going to talk specifically for doctors and lawyers, but I think this conversation applies to anybody who's working. But in the workplace, what are some resources at your disposal to make sure that you can continue work, even though you might have a disability or a mental health issue? And how can you address it?
Right. And I am not shy at all in discussing my personal dealings with mental health. I luckily have not really struggled with anxiety, depression. I've definitely have acute bouts of it where I've had moments where obviously something really sad, I didn't do well on a test, a lot of stressors with coming out in life. Those moments in time really was a struggle, but I wouldn't say that I've ever truly felt generalized anxiety disorder or true major depressive disorder, but I see a lot in my patients. But I have dealt with a lot of what we call obsessive compulsive disorder traits. And so I, for the first time at 36 years old, went to see a psychologist to officially get diagnosed because I always felt like there was something off, but I was always afraid to seek help because I didn't know what sort of stamp it would put in my file and whether or not that would be something that would be looked negatively upon, whether that was applying to medical school, applying to residency, or applying for my first job. But now that I'm more settled in my career and I feel confident and happy with where I'm at in life, I wanted to seek out that missing piece. What could I have been doing better if I had known this diagnosis many, many years ago? And so I was diagnosed with that obsessive compulsive personality trait, meaning I have some OCD tendencies, which is not necessarily a bad thing to have when you're in a career that requires you to be very focused on certain subject matters. So when I'm dealing with patients, I'm very focused on that patient. I'm making sure that I'm focusing on their symptoms, the workup, making sure that I follow up with their notes. I get my notes, images, results, everything responded in a timely manner. Those are great qualities to have in a physician, but that's a really terrible quality to have in a partner, someone that you are married to, a parent, a son, a daughter. If they are constantly focused on work and only work, and then they're not focusing on family time when they're at home because they're always thinking about other things, it starts to cause that relationship struggle within your personal life. That was the big reason I wanted to seek out help, is that I really felt like my work life was honestly almost 95% of where I wanted it to be. My home life was struggling. And so I wanted to figure out why.
Now, did they give you any sort of medication or resources to handle the obsessive compulsive personality trait you have?
So the psychologist did not. I have yet to go see my family physician. I am due to see her in a couple of months. And I imagine that the conversation will go dependent on how I felt. If I felt like this was severe enough that I needed to do medication, then I'm sure she would prescribe me something if I felt like it was needed. But I really felt like my case is something that is on the mild to moderate end, and that's something that I could work on my own time. And so what I ended up doing was continuing with therapy. I actually used what we call an EAP, which is a program that most employers have where you can get between 4 to 6 free sessions with a therapist, psychiatrist, or psychologist. And you can do whatever mental health needs you deem necessary at that time, and it's all free and paid for. And so I utilized my 6 free EAP sessions with my psychologist, and we actually did what we call an EMDR treatment, and it really helped. It really worked through some of the historical traumas, as they say. It just changed my outlook on why I needed to be so perfect. Why did I need to get things done in such a timely manner? Why couldn't I let loose a little bit more? It wasn't perfect. I'm not saying that I'm cured, but it definitely helped loosen up the feelings I was having.
And for EAPs, they are employee assistance programs. It's not a legal protection, but a lot of workplaces have this as a resource. But essentially, when you're looking for your benefits, those are things that you can look for to add value to your career package. Not all corporations, not all careers, not all employers are actually going to give that to you. But if it's something that is important to you, you may want to check the HR resources for benefits to see if you are entitled to those via your company policy.
Yeah, and I kind of want you to touch on the legal aspect of it, but I don't believe that the employers have to know or you have to let them know. If I were to have a diagnosis of anxiety or depression, my employer does not have any legal right to find out or to be told that I got that diagnosis and what sort of medications I'm on. That's sometimes the misinformation that is put out there, is that a lot of high income earners, physicians and lawyers are afraid to get these diagnoses assigned to them because then they have to tell their employers. But really, if I had gotten the diagnosis of anything, my employer never asked about it. If I got put on medications, my employer didn't ask why or what or when. That has really opened my eyes up on the misinformation that I had. So I'm curious whether or not you saw any sort of legal protections there, and if that's true or if it's just unique to my employer.
I'll kind of walk through a list that I have. For general employment, you do not have to disclose a mental health diagnosis simply because you have one. It's not actually necessary. Now, as you go down a path of seeking maybe accommodation or seeking certain leave, that's when some of these items would be disclosed. For instance, there is a federal protection, which is the Americans with Disabilities Act, which provides protection in the workplace for individuals with disabilities. Now, if you're going to go through and request a ADA accommodation, you then have to provide the pertinent information to justify that request, whether it is medical information to establish that you have a qualifying disability, background information to determine what a reasonable accommodation is. So those are certain elements in which you might have to disclose. And that's just not a mental health disability. That's also a physical disability. Also then go down the path of FMLA, which is Family and Medical Leave Act, which provides certain eligible employees up to 12 weeks of unpaid job protected leave for qualifying medical reasons. So a qualifying mental issue or health condition could require certain treatment or cause the inability to work, which may end up qualifying for leave. I actually took FMLA when I had my surgery. I was out for several weeks and my job was protected and I was paid for those weeks. But I still had to disclose my medical condition as well as provide certain medical documentation that stated exactly what I was doing and why I was doing it. There are certain things to where if you are requesting help or if you're requesting support, you do have to give up the information, the keys to the kingdom as to what's going on so your employer can understand and make the appropriate accommodations. I think what you were leaning into is, do you as an individual, do you as a person feel comfortable providing that information and also battling these internal stigmas or external stigmas that may or may not exist?
Right. I want to piggyback on that conversation about FMLA because I fill out these FMLA paperwork all the time and it's as precise as you want it to be. I always bring in my patients and we always discuss how much explicit detail do you want me to tell about your situation? We can keep it as broad and general as anxiety needs a break for 5 weeks. That's all I have to say. But if you want me to explain that you had a mental breakdown, that you went into the hospital for a week and that you're now placed on medication, that is really up to you. And once we submit it, then employer will deem if that information is enough for them to qualify you for FMLA.
Exactly. And we can go through a list here in a little bit of certain mental health diagnoses that may qualify or may not qualify. But I wanted to continue on your question because that's a good one for misinformation and educating individuals. If you get asked during a job interview if you have any mental health issues or any disabilities, generally you don't have to answer that. I would also see that in an interview as an interviewer crossing a certain line, and there could be some civil rights violations there, depending on how the question was asked and depending on the result of your interview and whether you actually got the job. One thing I do want to lean into, though, is fitness for duty concerns. Individuals need to be deemed fit for duty for certain high risk or high pressure jobs. If we're thinking about law enforcement officers, if we're thinking about paramedics, if we're thinking about, to some extent, doctors, are you fit for duty? Do you have anything that can make you not fit for duty? So a good example, you might have a law enforcement officer, a police officer that is suffering from PTSD. And we want to make sure that as they are doing their daily work, being a beat cop or a traffic cop or a detective, that they're not going to have some sort of episode that causes harm to themselves or harm to others, or maybe even violate civil rights of another individual or bring upon a negative reputation on the department or the city or the state. Those would be certain instances in which a fit for duty concern would elicit the information that's needed regarding mental health.
Right. Again, these diagnoses are made with you and your family physician or your psychiatrist. That's really important that for people who are listening to our podcast and are looking to seek out care, I want to make sure that we also give you that information. The steps that you should be looking into is one, seeking out your family doctor or your primary care physician, talking to them about this and seeing whether or not there's someone that would be comfortable managing this, diagnosing it, and helping you walk through the treatment plan. If they are not, they should be able to refer you over to a psychiatrist who is the specialist when it comes to mental health. They would absolutely be able to get you the resources that are needed, whether that is medication, therapy, counseling, any other non-medical or pharmacological treatments. They are truly the experts. And then thirdly, if you feel like no one in the outpatient side has truly been able to help you, the last resort is to get yourself over to an emergency room, especially if you felt like your life is imminently going to end, whether by yourself or by others, and seek health there, because then they can also get some emergency care help, potentially get you into an inpatient hospital system so that they can better figure out what's going on in that moment in time and figure out how they can get you over that hump so that then you can get into a more stable situation, get handed off to your primary care physician where they can continue the treatment plan from there.
And stability is definitely important in your personal life, but also obviously in your career. Americans in general live with a lot of stress based on their financial means, which is tied directly to their employment. When you're looking for stability or you're looking for some sort of leave and you want to make sure that your job is protected, here are some of the examples in which mental health related situations may help qualify for ADA or FMLA. So severe anxiety that periodically prevents someone from working and requires ongoing treatment, major depression requiring treatment or causing periods of incapacity, PTSD, bipolar disorder, OCD, or other serious mental conditions that will interfere substantially with major life activities, anything inpatient, so inpatient psychiatric or residential treatment, and then regular therapy or psychiatric appointments when the condition meets the FMLA's serious health condition requirements. And then finally, one that I don't know if we generally attach it to mental health disorder, but you use it as a prime example, any substance abuse disorder treatment that needs to occur, whether that's checking yourself into rehab for alcoholism or drug abuse, that's also something that could help qualify.
Yes, I have actually seen several patients struggling with those things have gotten help. The cases that turn out the best are the ones that are able to figure those struggles out early, seek out help early so that they can manage it as it comes along rather than waiting for the really big hammer to drop, waiting for it to blow up so big that it truly is career ending versus someone that sees that they're struggling, goes out and seeks for help, and then tries to manage that as they continue to work.
And it's important to note that I'm stressed, I'm burnt out, I'm tired of working. Those aren't good enough reasons. You've mentioned this several times. You need to go seek out help. If you truly are feeling that you are depressed or that you're burned out or that you're struggling, you have to take this step towards getting that professional medical help. Because simply showing up at work and saying, I'm burnt out, I can't do this anymore, could essentially just have your employer looking past what's actually going on. They just might see you as an individual that just doesn't want to work, or maybe that you're just lazy, or maybe you've requested too much PTO, or you don't have the right work ethic. But when you go see your medical professional for help, you substantiate that claim. It's important that you always cross that line into getting the appropriate resources and the appropriate help and just having the conversation, whether it's a confidential conversation with your HR representative or a HIPAA protected conversation with your doctor. Things are important to really justify what you're going through and what you're feeling.
Yep. The ranges are not black and white. There's a lot of gray zone in it. And so, yes, someone that is struggling with anxiety, depression may go see their primary care physician and may not end up going on medications, but they are severe enough that they may need a referral over to the psychiatrist or the therapist. And that will take the same amount of time for medication to start working in your system. There are a lot of ways to get diagnosed. There are a lot of ways to qualify. You just got to take the time out and actually seek help.
And one final thing I want to leave us with, as far as professionals, doctors and lawyers, and again, any other profession, being proactive about this is extremely important because sometimes being reactive is too late. For instance, if you are going through something that is impacting your mental health, if you have something such as depression or PTSD and you're really struggling with it, sometimes you need to be proactive with addressing it in the workplace. If I am going before a judge or if I'm in a trial and I have some sort of mental health episode and I make nobody aware or I never attribute my actions to it, that can be cause for concern, which then may end up with ethical violations, license or work probation, sometimes maybe even getting my license removed or being disbarred, losing your license. I'm sure it's very similar to medicine. If you are trying to perform your duties as a doctor or as an NP or as a PA or as a nurse, and you cross the line because you didn't deal with your personal issue, your mental health issue, there's probably some ethical repercussions that could occur.
And I think that for us to end here, it's really important to highlight, again, the main takeaways from our conversation. If you're having issues, you should seek help. And that, yes, some careers are more high stress than others, but it's still very important that you seek out help when you need it because the ramifications are sometimes more severe. But also, on the other end, is that if you do seek out help, sometimes it doesn't mean that it's going to be a big red mark in your file and that no one's ever going to want to hire you again. If anything, it may actually make you look better that you are self-aware and that you're willing to seek out help and you're vulnerable and that you know your weaknesses and where you let the employers know that you're seeking out this help. And so it sometimes actually turns a bad situation into a better situation. But thank you for joining us here on the Medico-Legal Brief with Dr. Long and Lawyer Nik. Please make sure you join us every Wednesday at 10 a.m. Central Time for our new episodes coming out weekly. We appreciate your interactions, comments, likes, and we always love to respond. So please keep them coming. Yes, we're doctors. Yes, we're lawyers. No, this podcast is not medical or legal advice. Do not take anything we say as a reason to perform your own heart surgery, represent yourself in court, or diagnose your neighbor's rash. This is for entertainment only. Think of it like hanging out with your smartest, wittiest friends, not a substitute for an actual appointment. If you act on anything we say without talking to your own professional, that's on you. Seriously, don't do that.